Okay. I think most of you guys know me. Obviously, I'm one of the co-founders of Fountain, a digital marketing agency based in Norwich. Set it up, 11 years ago now. We've sort of grown it from just me and a few co-founders to 44 of us now. And yeah, my relationship with Neil's an interesting one because actually Neil's been part of our growth journey, really. I think when we were about 500,000 turnover, I spoke to a consultant in growing marketing agencies, and he said, "Get someone who's switched on, and we'll give it to you straight on your board." So we asked Neil to come on once a month and talk about how to grow our agency and keeping us true. Really, I think how this came about is, about a month ago, I think the writing was on the wall with what was going to happen. And I quickly assembled a team which we called the task force at Fountain, which predominantly just worried about our clients, thinking what on earth's going to happen. And we started researching and finding as much information and case studies on marketing during an economic shock, marketing during a recession, what's going to happen in different industries, and also sort of just canvassing ideas of some of the best people in business and marketing that we know, speaking to our teams at Google and Facebook to get extra data and starting to get some good ideas of just ideas and plans and things to do during this time. And as we started to bring that together, Izzy and I kind of said, actually, it'd be great to start sharing this beyond our clients. And I thought of going straight to Neil and saying, hey, would you be up for having this conversation in a couple of weeks' time? Obviously, it was supposed to be last week, but I've been battling COVID-19, so that's been a bit of a nightmare. And I guess here we are, really. So that's kind of an introduction to me and perhaps how we got here. But I don't know if you want to obviously add a few bits as well, Neil.
Yeah, I think some of you will know me through the Business Growth Club, and some of you had the dubious pleasure of witnessing me on a webinar this morning. And obviously, I've known Fountain a long time, and Marcus and most of the team there was always referred to as Uncle Neil, because I think it was just an external view, and it made perfect sense to try and say, well, how do we protect our local community? Because I hate the term unprecedented because it's used all the time by the media, but we are in very unusual times. I've lived through lots of different recessions and 17% interest rates and 3-day working week. That's when I lost my first job. But you can't actually imagine that, can you? An environment where the lights are only on for 3 days at a time. So factories and shops, etc., only stayed open for very short periods of time. And that was, I think, because of the coal strikes. There was also an oil crisis. There was the war. I think there was the Yom Kippur War. I think there was 74 when Israel went to task with Egypt and various other Arab countries. So the Arabs, in retaliation, decided to treble the oil price overnight, actually, which we weren't expecting. And I actually got a ration book. I had a little motorbike and I actually got a ration book in the post that they're going to ration fuel. So we've lived through various shocks, but nothing quite like this with the economic shutdown. So I think it makes perfect sense to say, well, how do we access people like Google and Facebook, some of the people who've got a huge amount of data, to say, what should we be doing? What do we do? What do we do next?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, because I think all of us are trying to take educated guesses. I mean, I think you're right in to say that there are black swan events. Nassim Taleb wrote that book about black swan events, and they obviously seem to happen every 10 years. This one seems, quite severe and sudden. But one of the things I always liked about working with you, Neil, is you very much took things back to first principles. So what I mean by that is when we talked about growing a business, you talked about 3 multipliers that will always be the case. You want to get more, increase the quality and quantity of inquiries, increase sales conversion rate and customer maximization. And that will always be true regardless. So I think as we sort of have a bit of a conversation today, and hopefully people who are listening find it interesting and useful, we can perhaps, give them some reassurance that some of the stuff we're going to be talking about will be going back to those core principles. And obviously, I think one of the main things I think we can do this content on, which I'm really happy to do, because I think it's actually better than you and I just sort of going off on, perhaps might be an enjoyable tangent for us, but not a useful tangent for the people who are listening, is answering just a number of the questions that they've sent in. And I've got 8 from the people that have signed up. And Izzy's been very kind and said, well, Marcus, can you ask these to Neil, and then Neil can ask these to you? But I suspect we'll just have a conversation around them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very much so.
Cool. So if we just dive straight in, the first question is just a pretty straight one for you, Neil. Ideas on how to maximize the opportunities that will come once we're clear of this.
Yeah, it's a good broad question, isn't it? And it would be wrong of me to say I've got any of the answers. But we were talking about the super forecasting book that you read just recently as well, Marcus, and it was trying to say, how do you use some common sense as well as some logic to say what's the world going to look like post-virus?
Yes.
And I think it depends on the sectors you're in. Some sectors are really in grave difficulties. If you're an online, if you're on the high street and you're a retailer, that's going to be tricky. And certainly has accelerated things quite massively, hasn't it, this last 4 weeks, from the slow decline, not the decline of the high street, but the decline of standard retail on the high street, because the high streets are still quite vibrant. Hospitality is going to be difficult. But at the end of the day, what you've got to try and think is, well, what's the world going to look like in, maybe it might be mid-April if you're in Italy, where they're going to start unlocking the lockdown. What's it going to look like in May, June, September this year, maybe this time next year? What's the world going to look like? What are your core customers going to be doing? What do they actually require? We heard on the Growth Club meeting we did this morning of somebody who's a martial arts expert, so used to training people in locations. So they would hire a hall, go to locations, get loads of people in, do a competition and award prizes and do some training. He's now doing everything online, and they did it very, very quickly. Used Zoom, developed his back bedroom into a studio. Out of 100, I think he said he had 170 subscriptions. They've lost 4. And this has been, which is a ridiculous number. It's been really embraced. So actually, the irony is that his profitability has gone up because he's not hiring, he's not having insurance, he's not hiring venues, he's not traveling anywhere. So you do start to think people have embraced this technology that we're using now very, very quickly, and has accelerated things massively. And I guess that's trying to think, well, how do we tackle that? And how do we grasp that opportunity? The same within the healthcare sector. It seems archaic now, doesn't it? But you would ring a receptionist at your GP to try and get an appointment so you could physically go and see them in 3 weeks' time to get your regulation 7 minutes with somebody who looks up on Google what's wrong with you. Now, most of the appointments are being done via video link like this, or via email. So the whole world, the acceleration, as I see it, has been really very, very rapid. And the trick is to think in your sector or the sectors that you work in, what's it going to look like? What do they want? What are the things that are really going to differentiate you from other people? But because there's undoubtedly opportunities there, economic activity doesn't cease. It does for the time being in some sectors and in the majority of sectors, but it isn't disappeared. So I think they're the opportunities.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I want to just pick on what you said there, because I think it's spot on. It's the sort of advice we're giving our clients, is that, you know, you can go dark if you want and hibernate for 3 or 4 months, but there are certain risks with that. But your customers still exist. They're still somewhere, right? They still have needs, and they've changed. And the martial arts example is a brilliant one. If people still want to exercise, you know, Rebecca Mother-Haas just joined Peloton, so she's doing the exercises online. Like, you know, it's just going, and it's taking the time. And I think that's the thing. I think, you know, we are almost going through different stages of grief with this crisis. And first, lots of people were in denial, and now we're in shock and acceptance and so on. But there is this gift of time that we have, you know, and when we settle down, I find, and you know, having the virus the last couple of weeks, I've been stuck in bed, and it's been a blessing and a curse. A curse because I felt horrible, but a blessing because actually I've had headspace to start thinking, well, okay, I know who my customers are, but what are their needs going to be moving forward? You know, and there's a principle I read about years ago, which I really like, which is the STAR principle. Neil, you've probably come across it, which says that the fastest growing companies always become the stars in a number one of the stars in a rising market. So an example would be that over the summer, you know, that Norwich are playing a game at Carrow Road. It's a really hot day, and someone has an ice cream stand. Well, they're the only ice cream stand at Carrow Road, they're going to be flooded. But the point is that people have got new problems now. There's a chap called Perry Marshall who wrote the book 80/20 Sales and Marketing, and he always says that the best customers are the ones that have a bleeding neck, which is quite a horrible sort of image, if you like. But it's people that have a painful problem. And I was on a webinar with him the other day, and he was saying, well, lots of your customers have new bleeding necks, they have new problems. And actually, someone pressed a big reset button on the hierarchy of you and your competitors, because actually there's some new problems your customers may have that you can solve in an eloquent way. And going back to your martial arts guy, how many martial arts schools are there in Norwich and in the east of England? 20 in Norfolk, maybe 50. How many of them have done what he's done? And probably not that many. Yeah. And his competitors may be sitting there feeling sorry for themselves and going, well, there's nothing I can do. I'm going to have to try and figure out how to get this self-employed benefits from the government. So I guess unpacking what you're saying, it's very much that. It starts with the customer and trying to live in their shoes for a few days and think, actually, how is your services relevant to them? And is there a way you can solve a new problem and be the first to market with it?
And I guess there's also a chance that capitalism changes slightly. I think that potentially less people going self-employed, because actually suddenly the self-employed have fallen through the cracks to a very large extent with any of the government support. Even one-man bands like me, if I'm a limited company and it's just me, actually I get no support. There's nothing.
No.
So potentially you have to think in those sort of contexts of, as you say, walk in somebody else's shoes and think, well, how is this going to work? Remote working is probably going to be bigger, but it's not the be-all and end-all remote working, but there's remote working will be there for some. So there's opportunities there, isn't it? It's just not feeling sorry for yourself and saying, no, you just got to pick yourself up and get on with it, haven't you?
It is, and I think it's also just, it's giving yourself the space and realizing if you're feeling a bit stressed by it. I mean, the big thing I did actually is I haven't read any news about the coronavirus since I caught it, partly because I didn't want to freak myself out, but it's been an absolute blessing because I've gone back to books on business and I felt better in myself in terms of not worrying about getting more sick and what's happening and how many people have died today and all the stuff that's just noise, that every minute you spend thinking about that is a minute you're not thinking about improving your personal situation. Actually spending the time in a good place to think about your business and your customers and see what comes to you. Because for me personally, when I'm more relaxed and have space, I get better ideas. And I think that's generally true for most people. But to segue on to the second question that Izzy wants me to ask you, and then you can ask back, Neil, because he's got some ones to be thrown at me. It ties in what you're saying about less people going self-employed. Because I think one of the things that people like about being self-employed is you could work from home and, have hours around your kids and your lifestyle and not have to clock in and clock out at 9 o'clock and do the commute like everyone else. And this question kind of says that is, do you feel that enforced working from home will result in changes to how we all work, or actually will people just go back to normality? And I think that's quite an interesting point.
It is an interesting one. I've worked from home. I've done both in the sense of worked from home for a few years now, but used to have an office and staff and then used to work in a corporate environment. You get a lot from a corporate environment and an office because they have they used to call it, the Americans call it the water cooler moment, don't you, where you can chat and you talk to people. You're not talking about what was on the telly or football. You are actually just interacting as human beings.
Yeah.
One of the problems we have with the self-isolation is actually we're quite social animals. And it's quite tricky to see. I can certainly see a lot more happening. And then you start to extrapolate to say, if we all work from home more or have more flexibility for some of the time, does that give us more access to remote workers then? Because it wasn't long ago where we were worried about Brexit. Seems a long time ago. Whereas now, if we're doing remote working, well, why can't I work with somebody in the Philippines? And actually, that might be a really good thing for me. And I can see a lot of that happening, where some of the barriers will disappear from that viewpoint. But difficult to know in terms of the remote working and the opportunities from home. It's certainly a watershed in terms of, rather than historically, what I would do is to say to people, we need to eyeball, so let's have a meeting, which is a coffee. I think a lot less of that will happen. But I always remember I used to work with some guys in the city. They were very high flyers and they would have staff all over the world. Actually, they would fly to Hong Kong to see somebody to sit over the table with them, even though it's Hong Kong and you're flying all that way, because there is no substitute for actually looking in somebody's eyes and seeing the body language and the rest of it. So it's not going to disappear, but I'm sure working from home, most of us are probably going to quite enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that, because we actually, so we also we love data at Fountain, especially internally, and we win more clients when we meet them in person. So we will travel,
Yes.
to Hong Kong. We do have one client in China, and that has been done remotely. But generally speaking, if we have to travel across the country, we will, because it's just, like you say, you can't beat that eye to eye, and that sort of just feeling someone's presence in the room and just get a real sense for them. And but that's ultimately that's what we're in a service business, and ultimately in a service business, you're selling a relationship. And it's hard to have a relationship with people online. The counter to that, having said that, is Rob Sales, who I believe you introduced me to. I mean, he's ran his agency virtually for years. So I was speaking to him a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying, I feel everyone's playing catch up, because I've got clients in America, Australia, and I've got a remote team across 4 different continents. And I've got freelancers and clients that I've worked with for years I've never met in person. He lives in Norfolk Coast because he loves that sort of lifestyle. But so it can work for people, and perhaps this is a moment where people go, actually, it is possible. It might not be palatable for some people, but it's possible.
And it might be that actually, when you extrapolate that a little bit in terms of Rob, because I think he's up in Sheringham.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, which is to say, maybe people won't live in the cities anymore. But what happens to the property market? Because you normally have to live where you work. Whereas actually, if you can do a lot of remote working, why would you live in London rather than in Sheringham? Or in Rob's case, I think he was in Doncaster from memory, which is a shithole if anybody knows Doncaster. So Sheringham is a real win. So, but why not? He can run his does a lot on Facebook, doesn't he? And he's really great at IT. So maybe this is some of the things to say. Actually, people choose where they want to live slightly more. So one of the questions Izzy gave me to ask yourself, Marcus, is, and this is a really important one from your perspective and also ours, how do you encourage people to continue investing in sales and marketing, when budgets are being slashed and cash flow is tight at the very least? So how do you do that?
This has been the story of the last sort of 5 weeks, I guess. So at first, we want to just ask the question, should I keep spending, or should I dial it down, or should I stop? And all of the evidence that we found, and a lot of it was, I'd say you could say it's biased, because it comes from Marketing Week and the drama of various institutions that are to do with advertising. But there's some good stuff in Harvard Business Review. But it is very, very hard to find examples of companies that really cut their marketing back to the bone or stopped, who came out of a recession really well. There are examples of companies I found that after 3 years after recession had got back up to beyond where they were before. So I read a book at the weekend on mental models, and it talked about the golden rule that Charles Darwin had, and Darwin always would seek out people that had the opposite theory to him and really interrogate that to make sure that he was right. So I set a task for our team this week, and Izzy would have seen it because it was like put it on the Monday morning shout out. I want people to try and find case studies of businesses that during a recession went dark, cut their marketing down significantly, and came out really well. And we're struggling to find that. Doesn't mean it's not there. My next way of trying to figure that out is I want to do a piece of market research and interview lots of CFOs, because they'll have the numbers and the books, whereas marketeers who tend to report on this tend to be biased as well. So, but let's just assume that it is a good idea to say something, to keep spending some money. We did a bit of market research as well. Additionally, we went to 50 agencies that we know that had over 1,000 clients about 2 weeks ago, and asked what percentage were spending more, spending the same, spending less, and stopping. If I just get the results up now, this would have changed probably in the last week or so, but it's telling. 3.4% of clients are spending more, 61% are spending the same, 20% are spending less, and only 14 are pausing all spend. So presumably people listening are going to probably be in the category of spending the same and spending a bit less. So, how do we persuade people to continue to invest? Well, by people, we probably mean the FDs and CFOs. Those are the people we're sort of discussing at the minute. And I think you set up a spreadsheet, really. I know it sounds really basic, but most marketeers won't forecast and draw out what the return on investment they expect from different marketing activities. Good digital marketing managers should be measuring and improving everything. So they should have an idea of, we spend this much money here, here's the sort of customers we get back. So really, I think it's working with the FDs and CFOs. And, I'm not immune to this. There was a board meeting this morning where it was a debate between the finance people and me and the marketing guys on actually how much extra do we spend, because it feels very, very odd, if you're furloughing people and you're cutting everything. I mean, one of the things someone said this morning is, look, we've stopped buying birthday presents for people at Fountain. They normally get a £50 Amazon voucher. That's out the window. And you're telling me you want to launch a PR campaign and hire a PR consultant. Are you kidding me? But you have to compartmentalize and say, one is business as usual and preservation, and the other one is our return on investment. It's acquiring new customers. But within that, there are still rules that are prevalent in marketing and data. So the 80-20 rule is a favorite one of mine, simply because you can't miss it when you look at data all the time. So that's basically saying that 20% of your spend will bring 80% of the revenue. So you can cut a bit and really focus your marketing. But from everything I've read, you kind of, it seems ridiculous to not say something to potential customers and to existing customers right now. So then I kind of put it back on the FD and say, well, are you suggesting we do nothing and go dark? And they normally say no. I said, well, from that space of what we should be saying, let's try and get a budget together. So hopefully that's useful. It's going to be forecasting and essentially trying to plot out what you want to say to people, but you have to say something right now. You're going dark from everything I've seen. And one example that's really interesting, I was speaking to someone a few weeks ago who's very senior at, I'll say it, this is a small group at Mars, and they did a test a few years ago where they stopped advertising for Mars bars in the northeast of England. And, they thought it's probably not going to make any difference because it's an impulse buy. You get your Mars bar and you're at the checkout and you see it, it's an impulse. Dropped by 50%. So after 3 months of nothing, and they were just, right, we don't know how this works, but it's the front of mind of Mars. We need to be saying something, and even if it's Cadbury's with their gorilla playing the drums or whatever. There's that book, Neil, you probably read it, called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And law 1 of marketing is be first to mind. I fancy chocolate, Mars. So the point is when we're in a crisis like this, people still need to be thinking of you as we come out of it. So even though they might not be buying right now, you want to be front of mind. And it's probably harder to play catch up if your competitors have been talking during this time.
That's really fascinating, isn't it? Who'd have thought Mars bars would drop that much?
Yeah.
You can imagine putting an argument together. Well, it's already on Facebook. I've already done it.
I'm sure everyone's putting it out now and then posting me in, and then my friend at Mars is going to get very angry. But it's, as long as their competitors don't find out. But it makes the point, doesn't it?
Really? It does. And I suppose some businesses have shut altogether. I mean, I think Primark's a great example, isn't it? So no online presence, which now doesn't look that smart. And shutting all the shops and everything else, are doing it really quickly because they're quite ruthless in the way they've treated their staff and suppliers. And Virgin is another example, isn't it, of very ruthless actions. So, they haven't got a message, but other people have still got a message to get out there, haven't they?
Well, I think that's it. And I think you can still go into hibernation. It's what we're advising a couple of clients and saying, look, okay, you genuinely cannot service people because there's a lockdown. So, and you furloughed your entire team, great. So, but spend something on marketing. And it's a bit of a leap because it's kind of everyone's in survival and batten down the hatches mode to then say, but the truth is you need to say something. And normally we say to people, well, can we just show you some data? Here's what your competitors are doing right now. Here's what they're saying. And as soon as you start thinking, well, gosh, my competitors are talking, we should be saying something as well.
Yeah.
And I think we can get onto messaging in a bit. You don't want to be saying the same old thing because the world has changed at the minute, but you need to be saying something. There's an example, Neil, actually, I'll bring in now, which I used on another webinar. I got it from Mark Ritson, who wrote a great piece in Marketing Week. It's about Marks and Spencer's. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but during the Second World War, Marks and Spencer's pivoted their offering to make ration clothes to give out to the British people. And I didn't know that. A lot of people these days don't, but it was remembered in the 50s and 60s, which were the heydays of M&S and how it became a household name. So the question is, what can you be doing to help if you can pivot, and then talk about it?
Yeah. And I suppose that brings us on to the next question that somebody has asked, which is to say, well, how do you make your offer relevant and appealing in the current climate, but also in the so playing to the long term? Because we do see some advertising and marketing at the moment which looks quite crass because it hasn't changed or altered at all, and it just makes you think, what world are you in?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The world has changed. I think the risk with making it appealing, you can look at the 4 Ps of marketing and go back to sort of the basics, and you can look at pricing. And I think the trouble with pricing, from what I've read, there's a study done by Kantar, and they just said that if you are considered mid-market or sort of high, you wouldn't get Rolls-Royce, offering discounts, phantoms, and but, you need to stay consistent with your brand values and your market position. Having said that, you can just rework your offering to be helpful for people. And in terms of communicating, Facebook offered a really good framework that I'll share with everyone now that we're finding quite useful. It's called the 3 A's. So the first A is assurance, which hopefully most people have done, which is assuring customers, clients, everyone that you are still in business or you're doing something, and everyone's been safe in the process, right? And I hope people should have done that already, right? The next A is assistance, which is this, well, what more can we do to help? And not saying what can we do to help in quite a generic sort of way that everyone's doing. There was a brilliant tweet the other day. Someone said, gosh, I didn't know so many CEOs of large corporates were really there to help me during this time. It's a bit ridiculous. I really care about you. No, but what you can do to help is actually, payment plans. That's actually helpful, what the banks are doing. You can look at your customers and say, look, how about you don't pay anything now and pay later, or something like that, providing it's consistent with your values, but just doing a little bit extra to help. Go, look, I know you're stuck at home right now. I think and then the final one is action. So what actions are you taking on a broader level to help with the COVID crisis? If you can do that, what's your M&S thing? Are you able to give something away to help carers or whatever? And people are already starting to do that. But it's quite a nice framework, I think, to start talking about yourself and your service. Because truthfully, actually, right now probably isn't the best time to sell. There's a mantra I was giving clients about 3 weeks ago, which they're still doing, which is serve, don't sell. So we want to try and help people. Now, again, the caveat is you need to stand out from the noise of all these CEOs saying that they really care about me and my life and all the rest of it. It needs to be genuine. But if you have a good relationship with your clients, pick up the phone to them and say, look, how best can we help you right now? What are the extra things you need? Providing that you have a good relationship and you're a regular supplier to them. But I think that's the thing, is as time goes on, then you can look at making it slightly more appealing by going back to the first principles we spoke about, what's going on for them right now.
Yeah.
How can we assist them? What actions can we take to make their life easier and better? And are there new sort of versions of our products and services that we can tailor? Because the golden triangle of marketing is still there, right? Right message, right time, right person. And as we go through different stages of this crisis, the message will change because the time will change. And there are ways, digitally and non-digitally, to still get in front of the right people. Yeah. Because they're still around, and it's just playing with that.
And indeed, that makes perfect sense, because we may come out of this much quicker than some people would imagine.
Yeah,
it's unusual compared to other recessions. where the financial crisis and or very high interest rates, etc., they take a long time to work through. This is self-imposed, so actually we might bounce quite quickly. Some sectors clearly won't, but general economic activity could well bounce very quickly.
Yeah.
No, thanks for that, Marcus. That was good.
Yeah, no worries. The next question is quite an interesting one, and this is, we've talked about that a little bit recently. Is it risky doing large contracts for companies? Will payments be made?
It's always been risky. To be fair, I think one of the things is it's always been risky to end up with one dominant customer or one dominant supplier, be that of credit insurance or a product or whatever it is. So it's always been risky, and it must be even more risky now. I think what makes it slightly easier is you can probably have a conversation about it now, whereas that's not always an easy one to do in the past. But you can ask about payment terms. Some companies have been very good in terms of payment terms and have accelerated. The supermarkets, which normally play hardball, have actually been quite good. I think you could do a bit of research. It's nothing to stop you pro-formaing people. If I was building a website for somebody, traditionally website builders would get a percentage up front. Nope, never mind. I think if you're supplying goods, then make sure your T's and C's are right and strong. Make sure you understand who the customer is in terms of, are they a partnership? Are they, sole trader? Are they a limited company? But I would suggest pro forma. And I think if you discussed it with people to say we need a payment plan. I have seen some evidence of a client who queried an invoice to say, how do I know if I paid you this? It's for a service, that actually the service will still be there. The supplier didn't respond very well. It just said, well, we're not altering our payment terms at all, full stop. And that's quite a risky strategy, because there was a bit of me thinking, you know what, actually, I can find you somewhere else, because you're not unique. Very few people are unique. And actually, most of us have quite long memories of thinking, that's actually not that helpful. So I think they got their strategy totally wrong, I think. But I do think you do need to be cautious.
Yeah, and it is a tricky one, because now isn't really the time to be playing hardball and having other clients that perhaps want to. Obviously, we're speaking to our landlords and the government and payment plans for various things, and then obviously some clients are doing the same for us. I think you do need to come in with kindness and understanding. But like there's an expression you always use, Neil, that I often steal, which is having an adult conversation and being quite transparent. We had a client that said, look, can we break our contract and just pause for a month? We promise we'll come back on in May. And I said, well, yeah, but you have to settle up all your invoices, because there was some behind, and it was just that thing of, look, we're happy to make that that exception, but I need something from you. And it's the same with any negotiation. Yes, okay, you can have that, but I want this in exchange. But doing it from a place of, look, we're all hurting right now, we're in a difficult situation, so how can we find something that's mutually beneficial? I mean, we normally get the first month up front for a rolling contract. And we've been able to do that with a couple of clients we've won recently, and partly because we've just explained, look, this is the situation, we need cash, and you're a new company, and the rest of it. And I think if you approach it in the right way, then you should be able to get a lot up front. But it depends on the company, right? Because the ones we asked, we knew they had the cash. I mean, you can go onto the company's house and see the age of the company and see what's sitting on their balance sheet and so on. And I know that's looking back in the past, but you get a sense of the people who can do it and the people who can't. So.
And you should be able to have the conversation, as you say, the adult conversation, to say it's clearly risks on both sides here. How do we mitigate the risk? What can we do? And just get a feel. And like this company that didn't play ball, it just gives it's all wrong, because you just think, okay, maybe I'll have a rethink about this service altogether. So I think it's a very short-sighted way of doing it, and doesn't give you any comfort.
Well, I mean, it's funny, you could probably get the same outcome by just giving them half an hour of your time and really explaining why you're not in a position to do that, from a place of listening to them and saying, but we can do something else instead. I mean, it's kind of our default thing is, all right, look, if you want to pause for a couple of months, okay, right, we want to win you back, but I want a couple of introductions, or maybe something like this, or maybe we could do a webinar together for both our clients. I mean, there's always something that is of additional value.
Yes.
But you coming into it from, like you said, that adult conversation of, well, how can we both work together and get something beneficial beyond money if it's a problem? So yeah, I mean, but those people are probably acting from a place of scarcity and stress, like a lot of people are, which is never a good place to enter a conversation, I think.
No, very short-sighted, really.
Yeah. Well, the next question, Neil, this person's written in block capitals, I don't know if they're very excited about this or not, but it says, seemed conditions for the business grant is based on having property business rates. What if they invoice from home, have an OTR, submits their returns and pay their taxes on time? Do you know much about this?
I know enough, I think, to say, sadly, they don't get anything. The reality is the grants are for people who've got business premises. And I agree, I work from home, so but I don't pay any business rates here. I work from a spare bedroom. So the reality is the local authorities, as I understand it, most of them are now geared up because they actually write to you. You can't apply for it as such. They write to you and say, well, you're eligible for the 10 or 25 grand grant, but it is dependent on you occupying business premises. And it is one of those things that for smaller companies, actually they do fall through the net. There has been very little support. It's the only thing that slightly worries me with government and some of the things that I've read is they talk about, 3 or 4 months' time. Actually, most of the small micro businesses won't be here in 3 or 4 months' time.
No.
If the economic activity has ceased for most small businesses, actually their ability to survive is very, very limited. But maybe something will change. Maybe they'll come up with something. I know one of the problems they've got is they don't know how to administer it. And it's actually, whereas business rates are really easy, aren't they? I've had conversations with councils in the past where I've talked about the Business Growth Club and saying, well, how can we take the Business Growth Club to your residents? The really big issue is they actually don't know the businesses in their area because there is no register. Anybody, we can set up in, partnership today. There is no register as such. We tell HMRC if we're self-employed, but we don't tell anybody else. So the only register that the local authorities have got is for people who pay business rates. And quite often you'd find in councils that the business rates department or whatever, because of GDPR and the rest of it, won't share information with the rest of the council either. So they're ring-fenced. The councils aren't allowed to exploit that information. So it is a real logistical nightmare. But the bottom line is, if you're not in business premises, you're not getting a grant.
No, what do you think the delay is with the 3 or 4 month delay? Because it seemed with we're in a position where we do have people on PAYE, so the small cohort that's being furloughed has been quite a simple grant for us to get. But it seems the government dragged their heels and now said, by the summer, by June or whatever. I don't know what the thinking is behind that, other than they don't have a huge amount to offer. They need to do something. I can't really see the logic. If you have any insight on that.
Yeah, well, mine would be slightly more cynical in that local authorities are inherently inefficient. HMRC is, as anybody who's ever dealt with HMRC knows, can be hugely inefficient. Your average politician isn't that bright. And you start to add the whole thing together with an unprecedented, I hate the term, but something as as catastrophic as this, you can't prepare for it.
No.
So the reality is, you add all that together with an intense period of we've got to do something. The only good thing we've got is we've now got a money tree. For years we've been told by politicians there is no money tree, and now clearly there is a money tree. You can just shake it, and actually you can write off the NHS debt. You can nationalise the railways. You can print money, etc., etc. You can end up with the Bank of England owning probably a third of the UK government's debt. So that's a good thing, and there seems to be an appetite to use it. Long term, it'll be very fascinating to see how that turns out. But bottom line is there's no infrastructure in place. It's very, very difficult. So nothing's going to change on that as far as I can see. No,
I really feel for self-employed friends, and having been self-employed in the past, it's not nice, because I think they're the backbone of the economy, to be frank.
It's very, very hard.
So
So I haven't got any. So the next question I've got here is, and I'll read this one because it's quite a long one. It's an interesting one. Everybody seems to be doing the same thing, And to be honest, the digital noise of we can help, listen to my podcast, come to my virtual event, participate in my webinar is becoming frankly too noisy. I actually feel uncomfortable by the sheer thought of adding to the digital feeds of shouting, which mostly seems to be a semi-inspirational look at me message. I know that knowing your audience, clear messaging and authenticity is key. I'm really just worried that my little voice won't be heard. So where would you start with a strategy to ensure your message doesn't only cut through the noise, but actually gets seen amongst the thousands of other posts? That's a heartfelt question there.
It really is. And I have such sympathy with it. Do you know what I mean? Because I think everyone's getting a bit, you know, that you have early adopters, and then there's sort of a curve of people that, you know, Johnny come latelys, and it feels that now, you know, doing a webinar, setting it up 3 weeks ago was let's start doing on that. That's a good way to communicate, and now everyone's doing it. I think the truth is, again, you go back to first principles, right? So the way to stand out is offer real value that solves someone's really painful problem. And what I mean by that, we always say that when I'm creating content online for clients, and how do you stand out from the noise? I always say, well, the person who's reading this, what's their 3 a.m. problem? What's the thing that's keeping them awake at night? And if you're B2B, normally people are worried about looking bad at their jobs, you know, losing their job, looking bad in front of colleagues, having too much work on. So anything that makes them look good, some information that would help them make themselves look good at their job, make their lives easier, that normally presses those emotional buttons. Business to consumer is, you know, it's a lot deeper, right? Robert Kiyosaki has got his 3 areas that, and I'll explain them, don't worry, because at first it sounds a bit dodgy, but he calls God, sex and money. And sex is actually just social status. So, you know, I buy nice clothes because I think it makes me look good to other people, and it makes me fit in because people I like hanging out with have similar shirts or whatever, right? You know, money is a whole ROI play, and you see that a lot in B2C on Facebook and small business. You know, buy my course and get X amount back or whatever. And to an extent, perhaps this is, you know, I'll talk about how to navigate through this is a little bit of the money play, right? It's an ROI piece for business owners listening, of hopefully the research and the thoughts Marcus and Neil are discussing, I can glean something from it that I can put into an actionable plan, which means that I can get some return on investment. That's why they've gone on it. And then God is, I just want to feel happy. I want to feel good. I buy this, or I download this music because it makes me happy, or, you know, all the rest of it. So you put it into those categories, but truthfully, it's just going back to who do I want to speak to, and what have I got to say that's really, really useful. And actually, I mean, Izzy's Fountains marketing manager, and we talk about this all the time, you know, about blockbuster content. I'd rather say fewer things that cut through the noise. It's really, really useful. So that's partly why we did some market research, because I didn't want to do a webinar with Barclays to all their customers a few weeks ago and say, here's some research we've done that is kind of useful, but I'm then just a curator of content. But I revealed the study of over 1,000 businesses in different sectors and took people through the percentages I just told you guys, but then the different sectors they're in. And anyone listening, we can send a link to that report if you're interested. So, you know, don't feel it's top secret. But so I guess the question is what have you got that's of real value to them that solves a problem that they care about? Because truthfully, the only thing that sticks out to us when we're online and there's all this noise is something that speaks to the deeper part of our brain. You know, there's you probably come across in evolutionary psychology, Neil, the triune brain theory. There's a more primitive part of us, and there's the sort of more thinking. And the more primitive part, which is more emotional, is the bit that's triggered online, which is why someone who could be very cerebral in normal life actually gets triggered by cute pictures of cats or weird and wonderful things on the internet and clicks on it. So you're speaking to a deeper part of people, and, you know, you speak to their insecurities, to different things, but not in the bland, hey, I can help kind of noise. It's kind of like, look, here's what I do, here's what I offer, and here's some research we've done on how we can help our clients during this crisis, and it's something different, and I hope you find it useful. The other thing I would say about speaking on social media and content is vulnerability is so powerful, because I think the thing this person is probably feels a bit uneasy about, and I do as well, is, you know, they've said it themselves, this sort of semi-inspirational look at me, aren't I great? That is quite puke worthy, and it's quite ego driven. And actually people, you know, some of the posts that I think that I've looked on LinkedIn and I've sort of measured that seem to have got the most interactions. And when I say, you know what, we've had a really tough time at the minute at Fountain, or I used to be terrified of public speaking, so I decided to go and join Norwich Speakers Club, and that really helped. Now I've set one up at Fountain, and it's really great to see the guys progressing. Some content like that I put in the past tends to get the most shares because it's real and it's human, and it's actually saying, I don't have the answers, but here's what I'm trying, and I hope you find this interesting. Here's my hypothesis. So that's what I would say, is just that being authentic and really solving deep problems that are emotionally seated is the way to stand out. But it's got to be congruent and useful to your target audience and what they're going through. So I think put a webinar on if you've got some value and some things to share. You know, some of the concepts that you and I've shared today, Neil, I know you've said you shared some, you know, to your community already today on a webinar, and I shared with Barclays customers a week ago, and that's hopefully been useful to people. And I think if you're trying to add value from a place of authenticity, then people will listen.
And I think that's all brilliant stuff, Marcus, and makes perfect sense. And in terms of cutting through the noise, you don't want hundreds of likes, do you? The reality is you want to make a difference to 1 or 2 people or 10 people or whoever, to actually say that it resonated with them. It's not a numbers game in the true sense, is it?
You know what's interesting? So when we measure the LinkedIn posts, because LinkedIn's obviously our platform because we're B2B, I much prefer fewer likes and more discussion. You know what I mean? Of course, saying thank you, that was really useful. What about this? Because then I know they've actually read it. It's not just my mates liking because they're my friends. Because anyone can do a like, but it's that sort of, wow, that was really useful. Have you read this book, by the way? Oh no, I haven't. I'll have to buy it. Thank you. Hope you're well. And it's the more comments, I think, is led by that. And it goes back to that thing of just talking to people. But this person, you know, I love the question actually, because
it's a very good one.
I'm worried my little voice won't be heard. We'll say that. That's a great opening. Look, I'm worried about there's a lot of noise out there. I'm worried about sharing, but look, here's what I'm doing at the minute. Here's what's useful for my customers. If you're someone who buys these products or services, you might find this interesting as well. I hope you're all doing well. It's kind of rather than, hey, I'm CEO of this company, I'm here to help if you need anything. Like,
no, absolutely. And in terms of, I know you're a great reader, Marcus. Somebody's asked for, do you have any recommendations from any online marketing courses that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number. I think I'll start with probably the one that will have the best impact. Obviously, it will vary on where their understanding of marketing is. So Ryan Dice, which someone told me the other day is pronounced Dice. So there you go. I can get
how you spelling it? D-I-C-E?
No, D-I-E-S-S. Ryan Dice, or Dice,
oh, okay.
I call it. He owns the company Digital Marketeer. He's giving away all of his courses for free throughout the crisis, and that's what I get my guys trained on. His stuff's good. Other people to learn from. The master of writing copy is Mr. Drayton Bird. This guy's been writing copy since the 1950s. He's in his 80s now. I went for lunch with him last year, and it was a real privilege because he's no bullshit direct copywriter, but not an American style, very sort of British and eloquent. And yeah, his content's really good for getting messaging right. And then Perry Marshall. He's very American, if you know what I mean, but his book 80-20 Sales and Marketing is will really help you get focused during this crisis, I think. And he's got content at the minute about what he calls slingshot recoveries, how to sling your way out of it. But I'd start with Dice and then get Drayton Bird and Perry Marshall as well as supplements if you have time.
Yeah, sounds like good advice. And what books are you reading at the moment, Marcus?
Oh gosh, so I've just finished one called Mental Models, which is it's 30 mental models. So I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a mental model, you probably are, Neil. But oh great, so Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner, did a talk in the 90s, saying the way that him and Buffett make investment decisions is they have a lattice work of mental models. So an example of mental model would be the Pareto principle, 80-20. And there's probably, there's many that you will know already. So there's the Eisenhower triangle, Neil. I know you also triangle, urgent, not urgent, the quadrant, sorry.
Yeah.
There's different mental models. And what Munger and Buffett say is, look, we're not ridiculously intelligent people. We just take our time, make fewer investments, but get as close to the truth as possible. So the point being is that there's an objective reality, and we have our own interpretations of it individually based on our experience. And the closer we are to truth, the better decisions we're going to make.
Mm-hmm.
So here's lots of thinking tools, if you like, mental models to help make better decisions, which I think in business is useful. The follow-up to that, if people have time, but it is probably the best book on business I've ever read, is Ray Dalio's Principles.
Mm-hmm.
You've come across that, presumably.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Dalio's about the 40th richest man on the planet. And again, I mean, he's an investment, but it's with investing, you're either right or you're not. You know, that's it. But his whole book is his principles for life and work. And even though it's a big book, the principles are very to the point, and they're just a great way of looking at the world. So those are the two at the minute that I'm really spending my time just trying to improve my thinking tools. So during this crisis, I make fewer incorrect decisions.
Good for you.
How about you, Neil? What are your ones? I know super forecasting.
Super forecasting is that one, and the other one I tend to have 3 or 4 on the go at the same time. Is Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion by Cialdini.
Yes, that's a classic, isn't it?
I mean, that's a great book. So it's just such common sense, isn't it? You just read it and think, well, I knew that, but I didn't really. So it's a brilliant book. So they're the 2 I've got. But I've got about 12, 15 books in a pile that are left to go through, because I just accumulate books. So I'm going to take the chance to read, trying to read 2 or 3 chapters a day.
So here's something that feels very infantile, but I had to do it when I had COVID-19 over the last couple of weeks, because Rebecca said, oh, well, you know, the upside of this is you can watch TV. And I'm not a big TV watcher anyway. Should I put the TV from our little home gym in the garage up into the bedroom? You can watch Netflix. And I was like, I just can't look at screens, and I'm just going to feel I've wasted my life. But I also couldn't really focus on reading a book. So I bought the audio book. I do read along. But what's really interesting, Neil, is normally I want to read a couple of chapters a day, like you just said. But I get home after a long day and Rebecca's put something on the television. It's the path of least resistance just to be a couch potato for a couple of hours. But actually, part of the problem is I just can't focus, and the TV's easier because it's being done to me. But now if I've got the audio playing, I can do the read along. I'm getting through so many books at the minute. It's fantastic.
So do you audio and read at the same time?
Yeah, I do it on Kindle. Not always, because some of the books I like a hard copy, and I destroy them. I scribble and make notes and do dog ear the corners. But when you do, it's called Whisper Sync. So when you do it with Kindle, and they sync at the same time.
Oh wow!
So if I want to read a bit quicker, if the chapter's not as riveting as I hope, I then turn the audio off and then just speed read it, and then it connects it back to the audio.
It catches up.
Yeah, only on Kindle though, obviously. But then some of them I actually, the ones that are really good, like Dalio's Principles I want to get deep into, I will actually just play the audio and just do the read along and just really kind of absorb it. So yeah.
I've never heard of anybody doing that.
No, I wouldn't think of doing it anyway, because it's what you do with a child almost. You do read along. Izzy said that's kind of what people do in English literature class in school. And it's only because I couldn't focus, because I had this fever and this headache and so on. And I thought the only way I can get this information in is very much by both audio and visual. And now I'm really enjoying doing it, even though I'm feeling a lot better.
I should try that. That's really clever. I never thought of that. So I don't know if we have any other questions at all, Izzy, that have come up since then.
So I'm just having a look at the chat. And thank you, Chris and Richard, who both said thank you to both of you for kind of answering their questions. Chris's one was on the one I'm reading. Thank you, Chris. Barbara also, hello Barbara, has also kind of came back to you on, Neil, you were talking about the kind of availability of grants for businesses that don't pay business rates. So I don't know if you can see the chat, Neil, but Barbara said, as I have someone working for a local council in the house and who's been redeployed in that area, the main reason for the delay is because they're really worried about fraud, because they're actually quite exposed to it. So it's all about mitigating risks and finding logistical solutions.
I think she's spot on with that. I'm sure that all the toe rags will be out trying to find the angles, won't they?
Barbara,
she's
do you have
absolutely.
anything else you want to say to Neil on that, or are you happy kind of just to share?
Was that to me? Sorry, it cut out then. Which is
that was to Barbara. If you...
Oh, to Barbara. I did wonder. I didn't hear who that was to. So if Barbara's there.
We're all good.
Hey,
Just
Barbara.
let you know.
Good. Thank you very much. Anyway. Cool.